Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and we are setting off in the Mazda CX-50. Now, this one has the turbocharged engine, which is super exciting. So on regular gas, it's like 227 for the horsepower, but if you do premium, it's like 250, and then the torque is like 320 pound-feet, 6-speed automatic. It's a really strong powertrain, frankly. And, you know, Colorado, obviously higher elevation. Turbochargers always help out quite substantially, especially going through these canyon roads. Now, a few things we'll talk about before we actually talk about, you know, the driving here with the CX-50. It's comfort of the car. So with the seats, Mazda always kind of makes their seats a little bit more narrow. Now, I'm just over 200 pounds and I fit in these seats pretty comfortably, but I feel like if you're, you know, above that like 250 range, you might feel like you're in a little bit of a tighter fit when it comes to the seat itself. But the padding is also something that I think is pretty good with the seats themselves. And, you know, when it comes to the overall design of the interior, I think this is where Mazda definitely shines in this segment. You know, they're obviously selling a more premium product in an economy car segment. And so, you know, it's nice that you have like the cross stitching across the dash, for example. And, you know, a lot of the touch points in the Mazda are really nice. There is still some plasticky stuff like the paddle shifters, obviously, you know, the stalks on the back of the steering wheel for the turn signal, the lights and all of that. But for the most part, they've done a pretty good job with all of the touch points. Now, something that's obviously been pretty controversial with the Mazdas is the infotainment system. It's all controlled via a dial. It is not a touchscreen. And I can tell you that, you know, overall functionality on it is actually pretty good. It's relatively easy to use once you get used to it. But with that being said, it does add extra steps where you wouldn't have those with a touchscreen, because the touchscreen you might just slide to the next menu, whereas this, it's like you got to click and then you got to go down instead of just being able to click onto the next menu. So there are a few extra steps added in. But what I do want to say is, as someone who, you know, drives over 40,000 miles per year and drives a bunch of different cars, I've actually become, you know, more on the side of dials over touchscreens for daily driving, because with a dial it's just right there versus having to reach over at the touchscreen. And that's Mazda's whole argument with not using a touchscreen, is that you don't have to reach over, so it's gonna be safer. And I kind of agree with them. I found that in, you know, my personal experience, it actually kind of helps out quite a bit. But with that being said, I still think it would be cool if they just did what most manufacturers do, like BMW, for example, where you have a dial and you have the touchscreen so that you can do either or, you know, in terms of what you're looking for. Now, when it comes to the driving experience, we'll kind of dive back into that quickly. Just like most modern Mazdas, the steering's really sharp. They all have kind of like a sporty feel. Now, obviously, being a crossover, it's not going to be as sporty feeling as something, you know, say like a Mazda Miata, but, you know, feedback's actually pretty good. Again, for a crossover, I mean, when you compare this to, you know, RAV4 and CR-V, this feels a lot more lively, a lot more exciting. And, you know, a lot of you might be thinking, you know, this versus the CX-5, and, you know, my kind of thoughts is, I think the CX-50 personally looks better than the CX-5. The wider appearance of this and the bigger fender flares just kind of give it more of a, you know, they're going for that off-roader look, but I think it just gives it a more cool, aggressive look. And then, you know, when it comes to the driving, they actually drive very similar. But what I've noticed is, because they've kind of tuned the CX-50 to be more off-road ready, it's not quite as sharp as the CX-5 when it comes to turning and handling, but when you go over bumps and everything, it absorbs them quite a bit better. So it's kind of like a give and take with the two cars. I'd still kind of, you know, lean more towards the CX-50 though, out of the two, even though the handling's not as good, because it's nice when you're driving down the road and it has enough, you know, travel and everything to absorb big potholes and all of that. So continuing along here in the CX-50, I want to kind of touch base on a few more things. So something that I really like about modern Mazda is actually the gauge cluster. They've been able to combine a really cool sporty looking gauge cluster with something that still has modern functionality, where you can see, you know, vehicle information like what your fuel economy is, for example. And I think this is something that a lot of other automakers are losing, because they're going for full digital and they're losing like all of the analog experience. And this has both, right? It has digital and it has some analog elements in the gauge cluster. And I think they've done a really good job. And they frankly have kind of like copied Porsche the gauge design, at least what Porsche used to do, because now they've got, like, in the new 911s and everything, it's like 5 gauges straight across, whereas if you went to the previous generation, it was like 3. And that's what this has with the 3 circles. I think it looks really good. Now, something that, you know, might be fun to test out is the transmission. This 6-speed is actually extremely responsive, and we are not in the sport mode, so I'll pop it into the sport mode quickly. It's really quick with the gear shifts. Like, it does take a second with some of the upshifts sometimes, depending on how far you are into the throttle. If you're really deep into the throttle, it'll be a lot quicker with the upshifts. That's just how automatics kind of perform. But the downshifts are always, I mean, press the paddle. It's not the quickest transmission on the planet, but it's pretty good. And then deeper into the throttle, it's smooth. Again, not the quickest, but I think it does a pretty good job overall. But I will say, every single time I've had, you know, one of the modern Mazdas with the 6-speed, I just haven't really used the manual mode all that much. I just usually leave it in automatic mode, because what I've noticed with this powertrain is it'll actually short shift if you leave it in automatic mode, because this powertrain has so much torque, especially compared to the horsepower. It'll shift at, like, you know, I think usually it's just right around 5,000 RPMs. The red line is over 6,000 RPMs, and that's because it's trying to keep it in peak torque, which again makes sense with the tuning and everything of this powertrain. So to kind of sum things up here with the CX-50 as a vehicle, I think it's actually really good all around crossover. These fully loaded are in the, you know, I think it's like mid $40,000 range. This one's a more loaded up package. Like, it's got all the cool stuff like sunroof and the nicer interior and everything. So for the price point that it's at, and, you know, when you compare it to RAV4 CR-V, it feels more upscale, it drives sportier, it's got a much better powertrain. And the thing that's cool about this powertrain is it's actually also extremely reliable. And so not only do you get a powertrain that has really good performance, really reliable, I've had a chance to talk to several Mazda technicians, and what they tell me is, you know, over the course, and this obviously is anecdotal, but, you know, over the course of a year at a dealership, they might only replace like 2 or 3 engines in, you know, across, you know, the Mazda cars. And so, you know, getting really good performance, nice interior, the styling this has, I think it's a really good option. And I feel like a lot of people that buy RAV4s and CR-Vs would actually be happier with the Mazda if they at least, you know, gave the brand a chance. But I think a lot of people, they just think, oh, gotta get a Toyota, gotta get a Honda. A few quick updates on the road trip. It's like 2 a.m. at this point. This feels so weird to be driving at this time. But anyways, I've learned a few things about the BMW XM that are pretty cool. So first off, this is a much better luxury car than I initially expected. With my initial tests, I was kind of disappointed with the luxury stuff because it's a very harsh car. I mean, it's an M car, right? M cars are going to be harsher. But what I've discovered on this road trip is that harshness does not lead to an uncomfortable ride. What this car drives like is, yes, it is a little bit on the firmer side, but it means that it stays like nice and planted. And so cars that might have softer suspension would kind of go all over the place on the road, whereas this, it just stays right where it needs to be.